No one expected what happened next. The hearing was supposed to be routine, another day, another debate, until Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez opened a plain manila folder and changed the temperature of the entire room. One page, one name, one forgotten document, and suddenly Marjorie Taylor Greene wasn't the loudest voice in the chamber. She was the quietest. You could see it in the way her hand froze over her notepad. You could hear it in the absence of her trademark defiance. Because when AOC started reading dates, wire transfers, private jets in a deal signed just 2 weeks before a suspicious vote, the room didn't just fall silent, it held its breath. And what followed wasn't a takedown, it was a mirror held up in real time. This dramatized story is inspired by real tensions, real dynamics, and real questions Americans are asking about power, trust, and accountability. While names and context are drawn from public life, the events portrayed are fictional. But the emotion, the feeling of watching someone speak truth to power with nothing but facts and fire, that part is real. Because sometimes all it takes is one voice, one folder, and one moment to remind us the mic was never off. Morning light crept slowly across the east-facing columns of Capitol Hill, spilling over the marble steps like a silent warning. The air was unusually still, too still. It wasn't just quiet, it was expectant, like the seconds before a verdict is read. Inside the building, fluorescent lights hummed faintly overhead. Empty hallways echoed the sound of distant heels clicking with mechanical precision. Security guards nodded absently, their usual small talk replaced by subtle glances at each other's radios. The coffee cart in the basement lobby served more espressos than usual, but no one lingered to chat. They took their cups and moved, eyes flicking to the clock. In hearing room 4B, the long, polished desk gleamed like obsidian. Microphones stood like sentinels, silent but waiting. C-SPAN technicians worked in quiet coordination, checking angles, adjusting focus, counting down in low voices. One of them, a young camera assistant with a clipboard in one hand and a look of restless anticipation in the other, leaned toward his colleague. "Feels weird today," he murmured. "Like something's off." His partner, older, battle-worn, adjusted the tripod with a click. "There's a storm coming," he said without looking up, "and it's not on the forecast." Across the hallway, aides clustered in pockets, shoulders close, voices low. Most carried iPads, folders, or phones. One of them, a young staffer with thick glasses and nerves dancing beneath his skin, whispered into his Bluetooth earpiece, "She brought the file, the one with the tab." "The tab? Red ink, handwritten. Damn, so it's real." He didn't answer, just straightened his tie and kept walking. At the committee table, Marjorie Taylor Greene's nameplate was already in place. Her aide adjusted it slightly. Perfect alignment mattered today. Greene wasn't there yet, but her reputation was. Her seat sat like a throne, unchallenged, brash, and full of noise, even in absence. Then came the shift. At exactly 8:54 a.m., a shadow passed through the tall glass doors. Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez entered. No entourage, no preamble. She wore a dark gray blazer, understated but tailored, with her hair pulled back and a thick manila folder under her arm. Her heels made no sound on the floor. One staffer nudged another. "That's not her usual folder." The second assistant raised an eyebrow. "She's not here for usual." As AOC took her seat, she didn't look around. Instead, she gently placed the folder on the table before her, pressed the corners to flatten it, then let her hands rest on top. Her eyes scanned the room once, measured, unreadable. Behind her, the gallery began to fill, slowly but steadily. Reporters in press suits scribbled headlines before anything had even begun. A woman from the Washington Post whispered to her photographer, "Eyes on the hands. If she flips that tab today, we're looking at a lead story." The chair creaked faintly as someone sat behind the dais. Still no words, just that strange crawling tension, the kind that wraps around the rib cage and whispers, "Don't blink, you'll miss it." From a far hallway, the faint metallic ring of a gavel being tested once echoed, then faded. And somewhere, maybe in the control booth, Maybe in a whispered message, someone said it again. There's a storm coming, but it's not on the forecast. The chamber door opened with the soft push of hydraulics, and Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez stepped inside. She didn't pause at the threshold, didn't scan the room for allies or cameras. She walked with a steady, deliberate rhythm, measured but unhurried, like someone who knew exactly where she was going and why. She wore no striking colors, no flashy pins, no media-ready smile. Just a slate gray blazer over a charcoal blouse, and a folder so thick it bowed slightly in her hand. Manila creased at the edges, with a single handwritten label in black ink. Disclosure Index 422. The kind of label that doesn't announce itself but warns, quietly. She took the second chair from the end, the one she always chose when she wasn't planning to play politics, but to work. With practiced precision, she placed the folder flat on the table, not thudding it down, not brandishing it, just laying it there, like a mechanic placing a wrench before opening the hood. Across the table, Marjorie Taylor Greene was already in place. Her phone, wrapped in a rhinestone-studded case, was cradled loosely in one hand as she scrolled through her feed. Her nails, long and sharp as policy attacks, tapped rhythmically against the screen. When she saw AOC take her seat, she offered a tight-lipped smile, something between condescension and curiosity. Well, well, she muttered under her breath, just loud enough for the air to carry. Someone brought homework. AOC didn't answer, didn't look over, didn't nod. She simply adjusted her microphone with a gentle, practiced touch. Thumb and forefinger at the base, a small tilt toward her lips, then let her hands fall back to the folder's edge. That subtle refusal to engage did more than words could. It shifted the temperature. A quiet murmur spread through the staff seating behind them. Someone reached for a notepad. A clerk near the dais double-checked the microphone levels. The atmosphere wasn't loud, but it was live. AOC sat perfectly still for a moment, her hands lightly folded, her breathing even. Yet something in the way she blinked, the stillness of her posture, the absence of movement. That was what made it loud. A kind of stillness that felt intentional, contained, armed. Marjorie glanced again, longer this time. She caught sight of the label on the folder and squinted. Index 422? She said aloud, voice curling with sarcasm. Sounds serious. Still no reply. Just a soft exhale from AOC as she gently tapped the corner of the folder. Once. Not a nervous habit, not a tell. More like a quiet signal, a countdown. And somewhere in the far gallery, a journalist whispered to their seatmate, "That folder's not for show." "I think it's the thing." MTG leaned back, crossed her arms, and chuckled under her breath. "Let's see what the socialists got this time." AOC looked forward, calm, silent, unshaken, because she hadn't come to perform. She'd come to reveal, and the folder was no prop. It was an opening move, one that would not just ripple through the room, but through the country once she opened it. The chairman adjusted his glasses and gave the room a quick glance before leaning toward his mic. "This committee will now come to order," he said, voice steady but not entirely confident, as if even he sensed that the usual rules of engagement might not hold today. A gavel tapped once. Sharp, brief, symbolic. The sound echoed across the chamber like a pin dropping in a cathedral. Around the room, chairs creaked as members straightened in their seats. Staffers behind the dais began typing in sync, their keystrokes a background rhythm to the proceedings. Reporters leaned forward ever so slightly, pens poised, cameras zeroed in. Every lens seemed to gravitate toward one person. AOC did not immediately speak. She opened her folder slowly, not dramatically but deliberately, page corners brushing softly against one another as she flipped to a tab near the front. Then, as if marking her spot, she set her hand flat across the document. Her expression was unreadable, part poise, part calculation, entirely composed. Then she raised her eyes to the chairman. "Mr. Chairman," she said, voice calm but crisp, cutting cleanly through the hush like a scalpel through linen. "I request time to address this committee regarding a series of financial transactions and undisclosed relationships that I believe warrant immediate ethical review." Murmurs began almost instantly. Soft, scattered, but unmistakable. The type of reaction that said, "This isn't standard. This isn't recycled soundbite territory." Something new just entered the room. The chairman hesitated, clearly taken aback by her tone, the precision of her words. He looked down at his notes, then back at her. "You may proceed," he said, tapping his pen twice on the wooden dais. AOC nodded once and leaned slightly toward her microphone. Her voice was neither loud nor aggressive. It was controlled, centered, the kind of voice that's been tested in rooms colder than this one. "What I'm about to share is not speculation. It is documentation, verified, time-stamped, and independently reviewed. And it concerns a sitting member of this body, Representative Marjorie Taylor Greene." The room stiffened. MTG looked up from her phone as if jerked by an invisible string. Her face shifted from bemused to alert. She blinked once, slowly, then set the device down beside her with a little more force than necessary. In the press section, one photographer whispered, "Get ready." A second later, the first camera shutter snapped. AOC continued, flipping the first page with care. "The American people deserve transparency. They deserve honesty. And they deserve to know when those entrusted with power may be using that trust for personal gain. That's not politics. That's accountability." MTG scoffed audibly and leaned back in her chair, arms crossed as if daring AOC to go further. But she didn't speak. Not yet. The tension in the room was no longer subtle. It was visible, coiled tight between every pause and syllable. AOC's eyes didn't leave the page, but her voice slowed just enough for the gravity to land. "This isn't about party lines," she said, looking up at last. "It's about the line between what's acceptable and what's unacceptable. And today I'm going to read directly from the record." More pens started moving. Reporters leaned forward, whispers stopped. Across the room, MTG's smile faded. The cameras were still rolling. And for the first time in a long time, she wasn't the one setting the tone. Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez had just taken control of the room. And no one, not even Marjorie Taylor Greene, was ready for what came next. Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. Her tone alone had already sliced through the room's oxygen like a razor through paper. She adjusted the microphone just slightly, then spoke the name like it was a verdict. "East Halo Consulting," she said evenly, "a company that received $95,000 in campaign disbursements from Representative Greene's committee over the course of 9 months. Several heads turned. A few members frowned slightly as if searching their memory for the name. But AOC didn't wait for recognition. She turned a page. This firm, according to FEC filings, was paid in 3 separate transactions: March 22nd, May 9th, and August 3rd, all under the label of Strategic Advisory Services. Marjorie Taylor Greene didn't flinch. She leaned back in her chair, arms folded in practiced defiance, and said coolly, "Every campaign has vendors. What's your point?" AOC didn't look at her. She stayed focused on the page in front of her, her voice low but unmistakably precise. "The point, Congresswoman, is that East Halo Consulting has no physical office, no employees, no active business license in the state of Georgia or D.C. Now there was movement, a rustle of papers behind the dais, a glance exchanged between 2 committee members, the kind of shift that signaled something was landing harder than expected. AOC continued, "We attempted 3 direct calls. Each led to disconnected numbers. We issued a records request to the state. No tax documents, no payroll data, no registered point of contact." MTG shifted slightly, but her expression stayed fixed, half dismissive, half amused. "It's a shell company, so what? That's not illegal." "I didn't say it was illegal," AOC replied, finally raising her gaze to meet Greene's. "I said it was empty. There's a difference." Without breaking eye contact, she reached to her side and lifted a standard 8x11 color printout, held upright for the room to see. "This," she said, "is the business address listed for East Halo Consulting." It was a photograph from Google Street View, grainy but unmistakable. A weed-choked gravel lot with a chain-link fence leaning at an angle. In the background, a rusted storage unit. No signage, no mailbox, no office. Nothing but a mailbox number spray-painted onto a post. Gas didn't erupt, but you could feel them behind tight lips. One aide behind Greene stiffened. A journalist snapped a photo of the photo. "It's probably a registered agent location," MTG snapped, her voice sharper now. "It's not uncommon." "Correct," AOC said, lowering the printout, "but only if the business exists. This one does not." She placed the image face up on the table and let the silence do what it does best: accumulate pressure. MTG sat upright now, her gaze narrowing. "This is a stunt," she muttered, but the room was already drifting away from her. People weren't watching her anymore. They were watching the folder in front of AOC, wondering what else might be waiting between those unassuming manila covers. AOC leaned back slightly, tapping her finger once against the edge of the photo. "This isn't theater," she said calmly. "This is the address where $95,000 of campaign money disappeared, and I have two more like it." The weight of those final words didn't just hang in the air, it settled. AOC didn't rush. She flipped the page with the calm of someone who had already calculated the weight of her next sentence. Her voice was steady, measured, not dramatic, not accusatory, just facts delivered without apology. On March 22nd, a wire transfer for $32,500 was issued from Congresswoman Greene's campaign account to East Halo Consulting, she began. The transaction was labeled as Strategic Advisory, Rapid Response Initiatives. She glanced briefly around the room, watching as a few pens began scribbling. A staffer behind the chairman's chair leaned forward slightly, eyes narrowed. AOC turned the next page. On May 9th, $28,000. Same recipient. This time the label read, Communication Expansion Strategy, Out of District Events. Then she tapped her index finger once against the paper. And on August 3rd, $34,500, labeled Regional Alignment Briefings. The reimbursement request attached to that one included receipts for airfare, hotel, and private car service in Coeur d'Alene, Idaho. Before she could continue, Marjorie Taylor Greene cut in with a sharp voice that echoed across the table. "You're making this up!" The outburst startled no one, but it shifted the atmosphere. The rhythm of AOC's delivery had hypnotized the room. Greene's interruption cracked that rhythm, but not AOC's focus. Alexandria looked up slowly, not with anger, but with something firmer, certainty. Her reply was soft, almost quiet. "I'm reading it, Congresswoman." "Not writing it." She held the document up slightly so the label and campaign header were clearly visible to anyone watching. "These are your filings, signed and submitted under federal compliance. If there's fabrication here, I suggest you start with the FEC." Someone in the gallery coughed. Another muttered, "She brought the damn receipts." AOC flipped to the reimbursement attachment. 3 nights, luxury lodging, lakeside. The reimbursement notes mark the trip as a strategy session, but the event calendar for that week shows no public meetings, no campaign rallies, and no press appearances. Greene muttered again, "I meet with people all the time off record." "That's not new." "Then the transparency issue is," AOC answered, still not looking directly at her. "Because no guest list, no agenda, and no invoice for strategic services were attached to this reimbursement. But you did claim per diem for all 3 days, and your campaign covered $1,800 in room service." Laughter didn't erupt, but the stillness that followed was worse. Greene leaned forward, elbows hitting the table hard. "This is cherry picking. Every office does this. And yet not every office does it 3 times. Through a shell company with no verifiable staff, tied to a property owned by a family trust registered in Clearwater, Florida," AOC replied, now locking eyes with her. She reached for another page, one corner marked in green highlighter, and slid it gently toward the clerk. "For the record, this contains the full reimbursement history, cross-referenced with corporate filings and property records. It's been added to the official committee documents." Greene's jaw tensed, but she didn't speak. And for a brief, biting moment, the hearing room felt less like a legislative chamber and more like a courtroom, one where the verdict hadn't been spoken yet, but where the evidence had already arrived. AOC closed the folder for a breath, then opened it again, ready for the next line item. Because in this room, today, the burden wasn't on rhetoric, it was on the receipts. The air in the hearing room shifted, not with noise but with movement. Tiny, scattered, involuntary. A click of a retractable pen, the slow turn of a reporter's head, the unmistakable hum of attention being recalibrated. For the first 20 minutes, it had been just another congressional exchange. But now, as Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez pressed forward with cold precision, the room wasn't watching a debate anymore. It was witnessing a dismantling. On the back row, a young political correspondent for The Hill tilted her phone at just the right angle and began typing at a furious pace. Her tweet would land within 90 seconds. AOC just named 3 separate payments to a ghost company with receipts. Greene's face? Stone. This hearing just flipped. 10 feet away, a journalist from Politico leaned in toward her colleague without taking her eyes off the table. Is anyone backing her up? No, he whispered. She doesn't need it. On the committee's left flank, a congressional aide, buttoned up, early 30s, badge tucked discreetly into his jacket, slid a thin laptop out from his leather portfolio with the silence of someone trained in discretion. He didn't look at AOC. He didn't look at Greene. He just started searching. His fingers moved like a stenographer's. East Halo Consulting LLC, registered owner, Clearwater, Florida, campaign finance disclosure. A few seconds later, he paused, eyes narrowing. Whatever he saw on the screen made him lean back and breathe. Once, slow. Meanwhile, AOC turned another page. She didn't rush. The silence now worked in her favor. Greene had stopped interrupting. And the further AOC went into the records, the more it became clear. This wasn't grandstanding. It wasn't theater. It was homework. Done thoroughly, delivered precisely. C-SPAN's view count ticked upward in real time. It had started the day hovering just under 3,000 viewers. Now it passed 20,000. Inside the gallery, a producer from MSNBC mouthed to her cameraman, "Clip this now." Midsection, from "I'm reading it, not writing it." That's the hook. Greene shifted in her seat. Her fingers tapped a slow rhythm on the table, like a clock ticking louder in an empty room. She glanced to her left, expecting a supportive nod from a fellow committee member. None came. Eyes were averted. One even scrolled silently through his phone. This wasn't normal political posturing. It wasn't a soundbite war with pre-scripted outrage. This was evidence, and that made it dangerous. In the hallway just outside, a press aide for a moderate Republican stepped away from the double doors and began texting rapidly. "She has docs. She's reading them live. MTG is bleeding. Chair hasn't stopped her." Inside, the chairman looked momentarily frozen, not objecting, not encouraging, just watching, the same way one might watch a match inch closer to a dry fuse. AOC gently tapped the next document against the table, aligning its edges before setting it down. She wasn't looking to provoke. She was building something structured, verified, hard to ignore. The gallery was now silent except for the soft clack of keys and the buzz of phones quietly switching from standby to record. The narrative had just changed hands, and for the first time since the hearing began, it was clear to everyone in the room, this wasn't going away. It had already started spreading. Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. The folder in front of her was already doing the talking. Each page a scalpel, each sentence a tightening of the room's collective breath. And now she reached into its side sleeve and pulled out a small, square envelope. She didn't wave it. She didn't announce it. She simply held it between her fingers and looked up. "Mr. Chairman," she said, turning her mic ever so slightly, "with your permission, I'd like to play a brief audio recording submitted for the record under Exhibit 3B. The chairman blinked, caught off guard by the shift in medium. "Do you attest it's been authenticated?" "It has," AOC replied, calm and ready. 2 sources verified the content. The voice in question belongs to a senior aide within Representative Greene's office. The call was recorded on March 9th of last year. The recipient, Mr. Alton Graves, an investor tied to Ridge Hill Partners. The moment the name left her mouth, a buzz rippled through the gallery. Someone in the press section sat up straight. A producer mouthed, "Holy shati," to her assistant. Ridge Hill wasn't just a consulting group. It was a political force with deep money and deeper shadows. AOC continued, already tapping play on a sleek black recorder. The audio emerged, crackly but clear enough to silence the room. Voice 1, aide. So the 20's going to get rerouted from the Freedom Rising PAC to the Florida LLC. That should cover the next two contractors. Voice 2, investor. Does she know the optics on that? That's a federal committee. Voice 1, pause. We need it for the beach house. She's got permits expiring. At that moment, AOC clicked pause. Not at the end of the recording, not at the juiciest part. Just before it, the silence she allowed afterward wasn't accidental. It was strategic. Suspense turned into substance. No one moved. No one even coughed. Even Greene, who'd shifted constantly in her seat before, was suddenly very still. AOC let the moment stretch. Then she spoke, slowly, not with fury, but with gravity. To clarify, this is a staff member discussing rerouting $20,000 from a registered political action committee to a shell corporation in Florida. Funds which, according to the call, were needed to support construction on a private property, specifically a beach house. She let the phrase beach house hang in the air like the scent of smoke before a fire alarm. Greene's fingers twitched. Her lips pressed together so tightly they turned white at the edges. A few aides in the back exchanged glances. One pulled out a phone under the table and typed fast. In the press gallery, a Daily Beast reporter was already emailing the quote to editorial. We need this on front before noon. Call it PAC to palm trees. The chairman leaned forward, voice more hesitant now. Do you intend to submit the full transcript? AOC nodded. It's already with the committee clerk and uploaded to the secure review server. I stopped the clip early out of respect for committee procedure, but the rest of the call includes direct mention of the LLC's registered owner, a family member of Representative Greene. The words were clean, almost sterile, but what they carried wasn't. It was implication made audible. Greene suddenly found her voice again, though it cracked at the edges. This is taken out of context. You don't even know what the money was for. AOC didn't look at her. She simply replied, That's exactly what I'm asking. Then she folded her hands on the table and waited, for the weight of the silence to finish what the recording started. The tension in the hearing room was now no longer invisible. It was physical. You could feel it pressing against the walls, thickening the air with each passing second. AOC had just ended her statement with the calm precision of a surgeon, the recorder now silent, but its echo lingering like an indictment with no closing argument needed. Committee members sat frozen, unsure whether to look at AOC, the chairman, or Marjorie Taylor Greene, who had not spoken in over a minute, but whose expression was beginning to crack at the seams. And then she exploded. Her palm slammed against the oak table with a thud that startled even the stenographer. Papers jumped slightly, her water glass shook, and every phone in the gallery jolted upward to capture the moment. This is an ambush, Greene shouted, her voice tearing through the room like a siren. A calculated, cowardly ambush. I wasn't given warning. I wasn't told there'd be recordings. The chairman reached instinctively for his gavel and struck it twice. Order, he called. Congresswoman Greene, this committee. But he didn't mute her mic. And that was the difference. Greene's voice, full of fury and desperation, poured through the speakers unchecked. This is nothing but a smear job cooked up by an activist in a pantsuit pretending to be a congresswoman, she yelled, pointing a trembling finger across the table. She's lying. Everyone here knows it. Across the chamber, several aides stiffened. One member of Greene's own party shifted uncomfortably in his seat, eyes darting toward the chairman. The press gallery lit up in near-silent motion, thumbs flying across phones, captions writing themselves in real time. AOC didn't move. She didn't flinch. She waited until Greene finished her sentence, until the rage began to lose its rhythm, before she spoke. Congresswoman, she said, voice as calm as ever, your outrage doesn't erase your voice on tape. The line didn't land like a punch. It landed like a verdict. Greene opened her mouth again but didn't speak. For half a second, it was as if she forgot what her next attack was supposed to be. The room, now fully awake, was staring directly at her, and no longer with curiosity, with scrutiny. The chairman cleared his throat but didn't interrupt. Behind him, a legal counsel leaned over and whispered something, eyes still fixed on Greene. One of her staffers, seated 2 rows behind, typed furiously into a notes app. Another simply looked down at the floor motionless. AOC, still seated, slowly turned the next page in her folder, not rushing, not savoring, just continuing. The action itself was a message. I'm not done, no matter how loud you get. Greene slammed her hand again, though softer this time. She's twisting facts. That clip. There's more to it. Then I invite you to explain it, AOC said, not looking up. On the record. With documentation, the challenge hung there, not shouted, not dramatized, but surgically delivered. Greene didn't take it. Instead, she leaned back, jaw clenched, arms crossed, her voice boiling just beneath the surface but unable to find purchase. And in that silence, in the stillness between the next breath and the next outburst, it became clear to everyone. The louder she got, the less power she seemed to have. For a moment after the yelling stopped, there was only breath. The room had fallen into that particular kind of silence that doesn't feel like peace. It feels like reckoning. The chairman no longer reached for his gavel. He simply looked at the two women before him, then down at his notes, unsure whether the hearing was still following the schedule or had become something else entirely. Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez closed the folder, not with finality, but with intentional pause. She placed both hands atop it and looked directly at Greene. No heat in her eyes, no smirk, just clarity. You keep calling this a witch hunt, AOC said, voice low but unwavering. But this isn't a witch hunt. She paused just long enough. It's a mirror. The words landed with almost no force, at first, but like a tremor felt deep underground. Their impact didn't register immediately. It grew in the stillness that followed, until you could feel the ripple from row to row, staffer to staffer, screen to screen. A beat later, phones in the press section lit up. Journalists began tweeting the line in rapid succession. This isn't a witch hunt, it's a mirror. AOC live. House hearing just changed tone. Hashtag live on the Hill, hashtag mirror moment. The phrase began trending within minutes, rippling outward from inside the room to the digital halls of Twitter, TikTok, and YouTube. Newsrooms clipped the moment mid-sentence, pairing it with B-roll of Greene slamming the table just minutes earlier. A CNN analyst whispered off-camera, "That's going to be replayed all week." Outside the hearing chamber, staffers who had been passing through paused mid-step. Clusters began forming in corridors where the live stream was playing on hallway monitors. One congressional intern, holding a stack of binders, stopped at a doorway where three others had already gathered. She said what? A mirror. She just said it's not a witch hunt. It's a mirror. She's not playing around. In the rotunda, a pair of tourists passing by the entrance to the hearing room slowed as well, pulled not by interest in politics, but by the unmistakable energy of a moment unfolding in real time. Back inside, Greene didn't respond. For the first time since the hearing began, she sat without motion, her hands flat on the table, her phone untouched, her mouth slightly parted but mute. Her fury hadn't vanished. It had collapsed, imploded into a kind of stunned disbelief. The cameras didn't zoom in, but they didn't need to. Every viewer watching live could read what her silence said far louder than her shouting had. AOC didn't gloat. She didn't press. She simply leaned back in her chair, eyes forward, the folder now closed but present. The mood in the room had shifted not because someone yelled the loudest, but because someone had spoken the clearest. What began as partisan tension was now turning into something else. A confrontation not about who shouted, but what could be proved. The emotional calculus had changed, and everyone watching, inside the room or through the screen, knew it. Down the hall, an aide whispered to her chief of staff, "We should pull our statement. This thing's about to go national." It already had. And Marjorie Taylor Greene, who had built her brand on defiance, now sat in the one position she hadn't rehearsed. Silent. The folder opened again, and the tension that had briefly settled returned with full force. Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez didn't speak right away. She flipped slowly, page by page, until she found the next tab. It was marked with a small green sticker labeled simply LLC Transfers, Edgerton. She held the page for just a moment longer, then looked up. The March 9th call references a wire transfer of $20,000 to a Florida-based LLC, she began, voice steady, eyes moving across the committee bench. That LLC is registered under the name Bay Rise Investments, incorporated 2 months before the transfer was made. She paused to ensure the words landed. The registered owner of Bay Rise is a man named Ronald Edgerton. At that, MTG immediately leaned forward, scowling. I don't even have a brother-in-law, she snapped, her voice tight with disbelief. AOC didn't look rattled. She didn't skip a beat. Instead, she reached behind the main document and pulled out a single-page certificate of registration from the Florida Department of State. Ronald Edgerton, she read, is married to Kendra Goolsby Edgerton, who, according to public records, is your husband's sister. She placed the certificate on the table, facing the chairman. This is the state filing for Bay Rise Investments, dated January 12th of last year, 2 months before the wire transfer. The listed address matches a property connected to your husband's family trust. The room went still. Greene blinked. She opened her mouth, but nothing came out. A few seconds later, she leaned slightly back in her chair, expression darkening, face unmoving. The silence around her felt heavier than at any point before. In the gallery, a journalist raised a camera and took a photo, not of AOC, not of the document, but of Greene. Because this was the moment her expression said what her words couldn't. No fire, no counterstrike, just that stunned, breath-held look of someone watching the pieces fall faster than she could gather them. AOC didn't press. She didn't embellish. She simply clarified calmly. The campaign records show the PAC to LLC transfer was categorized under regional coordination support, but there are no consulting records, no invoices, and no documentation of services rendered. She looked at the chairman. The money moved, but nothing moved with it. At the rear of the chamber, 2 staffers exchanged glances. One of them mouthed, "That's direct liability." AOC continued, her voice never rising. In addition to the wire transfer, our research found that Bay Rise Investments has no other recorded income, no other clients, and no filed tax return for the year in question. It was created, it received funds, and it stopped existing on paper less than a year later. She let her hands rest on the folder again. Greene, still frozen, didn't respond. No shout this time. No denial. Just her eyes, fixed on the documents in front of her, as if trying to will them into non-existence. And then, finally, a breath. Not from her, but from the room. One of those collective exhales when everyone realizes they'd stopped breathing without noticing. Because now it wasn't just suspicion, it wasn't just implication, it was names, signatures, paper trails. And the woman who'd spent her political career shouting down accusations now sat in a hearing where silence told the story better than any mic could. Marjorie Taylor Greene was still frozen in her chair when AOC reached for the next page in the folder, this time thinner than the last. She didn't look up. She didn't explain. She simply slid a printed photo across the table toward the clerk. On the back, written in neat ink, was a timestamp, April 17th, 2:12 p.m. She looked up only when the chairman asked, "Is that for the record?" "Yes," AOC replied calmly, and for clarity, she turned to face Greene, whose expression had slowly shifted from defiant to wary. "You stated just last week," AOC began, "that you had never met with Nicholas Averill, CEO of Westbridge Energy, that you've never even been in the same building with him." Greene scoffed but said nothing. AOC gently tapped the photo, now visible to several members. This image was posted on April 17th by an executive from Averill's own office. It shows you seated at a terrace table at El Encanto Resort in Santa Barbara. Mr. Averill is to your right, identifiable by his name badge and signature lapel pin. She paused, not for emphasis, but because the room had already gone still. "It was posted," AOC said, her voice a little quieter now, "then deleted." She looked directly at Greene, but not forgotten. A visible ripple moved across the gallery. Reporters leaned forward. Phones came up. A camera zoomed in on the photo now being handed down the line of committee members. In the shot, Marjorie Taylor Greene sat smiling, sunglasses perched atop her head, a glass of whiskey in hand. Seated beside her, Nicholas Averill, Unmistakable, laughing mid-sentence, elbow nearly touching hers. Between them sat a folder, open, its pages just barely visible in the frame. Greene finally spoke, but her voice had lost its earlier sharpness. That was a charity event. I talked to dozens of people. You said you'd never met him, AOC replied, that you didn't know who he was. I didn't know who he really was, Greene snapped back. I meet a lot of people. But not everyone posts a photo of you with their CEO, AOC said flatly. And not everyone deletes it minutes later, unless they've been advised to. The comment didn't spark gasps, but something subtler, heavier. People began typing again, not just reporters, but aides. One even removed his earpiece and whispered to someone in the back, "This is not just embarrassing. This is traceable." Outside the hearing room, the reaction was already taking on a life of its own. The photo, now screen grabbed from the C-SPAN feed, had already hit Twitter. Within minutes, it was trending under hashtag forgotten but posted and hashtag Terracegate. A tech-savvy intern had even located a cached version of the original post, proving it had existed and been removed within 12 minutes. Cable news picked it up within the hour. On-air analysts were already comparing timestamps, campaign donations, and committee voting records. AOC didn't reference any of that. She just returned her hand to the folder and said, almost as an afterthought, "The vote on the Clean Water Accountability Act came exactly 3 weeks after that photo was taken, an act which would have directly affected Westbridge's drilling exemptions." She looked around the room slowly. That's the kind of timeline the public deserves to understand. Not rumors, not denials, just facts and receipts. Marjorie didn't answer, because in that moment, she understood something terrifying about modern accountability. You don't need wiretaps or whistleblowers when the internet already keeps the receipts. It happens suddenly, without warning, without buildup, like a circuit finally overloading. Marjorie Taylor Greene slammed both palms against the polished oak table, the crack echoing through the chamber like a gunshot. The microphones picked up the full force of it, a sharp, visceral jolt that cut through every whisper, every side glance, every moment of held breath. "This is a damn circus," she barked, her voice raw with fury. "I'm not going to sit here while this little performance gets treated like gospel." Her chair scraped loudly as she shot up to her feet, eyes wide, face flushed with a mix of rage and disbelief. "You call this transparency? You call this truth? It's a setup, and you all know it." But the room didn't react. No one leapt to her defense. Even the chairman, who had been nervously adjusting his papers earlier, now sat still, watching her the way a physician watches a patient in freefall. And across from her, AOC didn't move. She didn't raise her head, didn't blink, didn't respond. She simply kept her eyes on the folder in front of her. That silence, that refusal to engage, only made the moment land harder. The louder Greene got, the quieter the world around her became. A moment later, the C-SPAN livestream froze, just for a breath, and resumed again with a perfect frame. Greene standing, arms stiff, hands clenched into fists, while AOC sat calmly, back straight, fingers resting gently on a page labeled Schedule C, Private Travel. It was that freeze frame that started it. By the time Greene stormed back into her seat, muttering something unintelligible under her breath, an intern in the back corner had already clipped the footage from the livestream and posted it on X with a single caption. When facts hit harder than spin, the tweet exploded. Within the first 30 minutes, it had 120,000 views. In 2 hours, it crossed 1 million. TikTok remixes followed almost instantly. The desk slam looped in slow motion, set to dramatic orchestral beats or deadpan silence. On YouTube Shorts, creators reposted the clip alongside split-screen reactions of voters shaking their heads or whispering, "She lost it." Cable networks aired it on repeat before the hearing even adjourned. CNN's Kyron read, "Slam heard round the hill. Greene erupts after AOC exposes photo evidence." MSNBC called it a turning point in real time. Even Fox, while defending Greene's frustration, couldn't avoid airing the clip, because it was the story now. Not just the content, not just the evidence, but the crack in the image Greene had so carefully constructed. That of the unshakable warrior, the unbending voice of outrage. What the cameras caught was something else. A moment of collapse, unraveled not by insult, but by documentation, by evidence, by the quiet power of someone refusing to flinch. And while MTG fumed, pacing slightly in her seat, fingers drumming fast against the table, AOC turned one last page, carefully, silently, deliberately. She didn't need to speak. The room, the live stream, and now the internet were doing it for her. Outside the hearing room, a crowd had begun to form in the hallway, phones in hand, watching the replay on screens only seconds behind reality. Inside, no one said it out loud, but they all knew. This wasn't just a viral moment, it was a shift, and everyone felt it. Even the one trying hardest to pretend it hadn't happened. AOC didn't lean into the drama. She didn't raise her voice. In fact, the quieter she spoke, the more the room seemed to lean toward her. She reached into the folder again, not rushed, not theatrical, and pulled out a fresh set of documents clipped at the corner with a brass fastener. The top sheet bore a bold embossed letterhead, Ridge Hill Partners, Strategic Holdings Division. At the top right, February 6, 2023. Without waiting for approval, she placed the pages face up on the table before the chairman. "Mr. Chairman," she said evenly, "this document has not been previously submitted to the committee, but has now been reviewed for authentication. I'd like to enter it into the record under Exhibit 5A. The chairman's eyes narrowed as he read the bold black lettering across the header. He nodded slowly. So entered. AOC didn't waste time. "What you are looking at," she continued, "is a draft memorandum of agreement between Representative Marjorie Taylor Greene and Ridge Hill Partners, a Nevada-based private investment consortium with direct financial ties to multiple fracking and extraction ventures in the Midwest." Someone in the gallery inhaled sharply. The words were specific, technical, unignorable. "This document outlines an informal, but clearly stated understanding," she said, tapping the page gently with her finger. "In exchange for Representative Greene's ongoing public advocacy for deregulation of private energy holdings, Ridge Hill Partners proposed offering her undisclosed equity in a subsidiary firm, Horizon Aggregate Ventures." At this, Greene's head snapped toward AOC. "That's not real," she said, voice hard and low. "I've never seen that." "It's signed," AOC replied, flipping the next page to reveal the signature block. "Dated February 6, 2023, 2 weeks before Representative Greene introduced legislation aimed at lowering capital gains taxes on energy-based private equity returns." Greene's face began to lose color. AOC pushed the document slightly forward so the rest of the committee could read the paragraph underlined in yellow. "Representative Greene shall, in good faith, utilize her public platform and legislative access to support deregulation efforts consistent with Ridge Hill's operational goals, in return for a projected equity allocation to be executed through Horizon Aggregate Ventures following confirmation of legislative traction." The words weren't vague. They weren't couched in lawyerly deflection. They were plain, transactional. Greene stood now, but didn't slam the desk this time. Her voice cracked slightly. "That's not even my signature. That's forged." AOC didn't look up from the document. "It was reviewed by an independent forensic handwriting analyst. The signature matches 5 separate filings you personally submitted to the Georgia Secretary of State's office over the last 2 years." She slid the matching samples forward. Initials, angle slant, pressure depth, all consistent. The room didn't stir this time because it didn't need to. The silence was the reaction. The chairman cleared his throat, looking both alarmed and frozen. "Representative Ocasio-Cortez, are you implying a quid pro quo agreement between a sitting member of this chamber and a private investment firm?" AOC paused before answering. She didn't look at the chairman. She looked straight ahead. "I'm not implying," she said softly. "I'm reading." And that was the moment everything changed again, because up to this point, it had been reimbursements, photos, and rage. But now it was paperwork, language, intent, and agreement. Greene didn't respond this time. She couldn't, because the document didn't shout. It whispered, and its whisper was loud enough to change the course of what the hearing and the country thought it knew. Marjorie Taylor Greene was already standing, her hands flat on the table, knuckles white. Her voice trembled, not with hesitation, but with fury barely held back. "That's not my signature," she said louder this time. "I've never seen that document in my life. It's fake, completely fabricated." The accusation hung heavy in the air, but no one moved to validate it. The committee room didn't erupt in rebuttals or support. Instead, it grew quieter, more focused. It was the kind of moment where everyone knew what was coming next, and everyone feared it might actually land. AOC stayed seated. She didn't meet Greene's eyes. She didn't change her posture. She simply reached into the folder and pulled out a thinner packet, 5 pages bound together by a paperclip. "For the committee's review," she said calmly, "this packet includes signature samples from 5 separate filings submitted by Representative Greene to various government offices between 2020 and 2023. She handed the pages to the committee clerk, who passed them to the chairman. There was no dramatic flourish, just paper sliding across polished wood. These include her 2020 Statement of Candidacy, 2 PAC registration amendments, a property declaration form for her Gainesville residence, and a signed disclosure submitted to the House Ethics Office in 2022. Then turning back to the document in question, AOC spoke with deliberate clarity. "The Ridge Hill Memorandum bears a signature that, according to a forensic handwriting analyst certified by the National Association of Document Examiners, matches all 5 samples in pressure pattern, letter formation, slant angle, and baseline alignment." The chairman looked down at the pages in front of him. He didn't speak. He didn't blink. He simply read. Across the room, several committee members shifted slightly, exchanging muted glances. Not one of them looked at Greene. A few looked toward AOC. Most just stared at the paper. AOC continued, "I've also included the analyst's full certification, dated and notarized, along with the side-by-side visual overlays." She tapped the final page gently. "It's hard to ignore, even harder to misread." Greene broke her silence again, but this time the fire had thinned into something tighter. "Handwriting analysis isn't proof," she hissed. "Anyone can fake that. Anyone." AOC finally looked at her. "Then I welcome your legal team to provide a rebuttal analyst, but until then, the burden of proof doesn't shift just because you don't like the result." The line didn't spark applause. It didn't need to. It simply landed, clean and undeniable. The chairman leaned back slowly in his seat. His face was blank, but his silence said more than any gavel could. Around him, members of both parties sat frozen, their eyes now not on the confrontation, but on the document itself. One whispered something inaudible to his counsel. Another tapped his pen once, then stopped, as if even the smallest motion might tip the atmosphere further. And outside the room, the reaction was already building. The document, its cover page, its signature, had been clipped from the C-SPAN stream and posted online. One tweet read, "That's not my signature. Greene says it. AOC proves it. #SignatureGate, #Ridge Hill Leak." Within 15 minutes, a trending thread appeared comparing all 5 signature samples in animated GIF form, showing how each curve, each slant, overlapped perfectly. But in the hearing room, AOC didn't mention the tweets. She didn't mention the viral clip. She simply closed the supplemental packet and said, "I rest my case on this section of evidence, unless the Congresswoman would like to submit a written rebuttal." Greene didn't answer, and in that silence the truth didn't shout. It simply waited for someone, anyone, to deny it with more than words. The room was frozen, not from confusion, not from indecision, but from the slow, dawning realization that a line had just been crossed, and no one was quite sure if they could go back. AOC sat quietly, her folder now mostly empty, its contents dispersed, submitted, read, broadcast, and dissected in real time. But she wasn't done, not yet. She looked up, her voice softer than before, but somehow even sharper because of it. "I know what this looks like," she began, scanning the semicircle of faces before her, some stunned, some unreadable, a few already shrinking into their chairs. "I know the headlines are being written, the clips are already viral, and I know some of you are worried this will reflect badly, not just on one member, but on this institution." She paused, letting that word breathe. Institution. Marjorie Taylor Greene didn't speak. She didn't move. Her hands, folded tightly in front of her, gripped each other like they were the last thing keeping her from falling backward. AOC continued, steady. But this isn't sabotage, it's sunlight. That single sentence hit the room like a quiet thunderclap. It didn't need volume. It needed only clarity. I'm not burning the house down, she added, leaning forward just slightly. I'm just letting in the light. And if that light reveals something we'd rather not see, the problem isn't the light. No one reached for their mic. No one objected. The chairman didn't touch his gavel. Across the aisle, even members who had initially rolled their eyes at her presence were now sitting with their eyes fixed on the center of the room. No longer watching a performance, but a process that had evolved beyond anyone's expectations. In the back, a committee counsel whispered something to their legal assistant. No laughter, no side jokes, just urgent words under tight breath. And then came the moment of collective recognition, not spoken aloud, not confirmed with a vote or a bang of the gavel, but felt, tangible. This wasn't just a hearing anymore. It was an investigation. You could feel it in the way the room sat heavier now, as if the building itself had absorbed the weight of the evidence. It wasn't about a single reimbursement or a missing invoice, or even a questionable photo on a terrace. It was about something bigger, a system tested by one of its own and confronted by someone who refused to look away. AOC leaned back, not smugly, not triumphantly, but with the measured calm of someone who didn't need to prove a point, only to make sure it couldn't be ignored. The American people don't want more noise, she said, voice steady. They want accountability. They want to know that if they followed the rules, so did we. That if they sacrificed, we didn't profit quietly while pretending to serve. Silence followed, not empty, but charged. Not unsure, but heavy with consequence. Because in that moment, the room wasn't responding as politicians or partisans. They were sitting in the shadow of something more dangerous than a scandal. They were staring at proof, and for the first time, they understood the floor beneath them was shifting. AOC didn't smile. She didn't gloat. She simply reached for her water glass, took a small sip, and set it down with care. No dramatics, no victory pose. Just the presence of someone who had done the homework, and the silence of a room that realized she wasn't here to burn it down, only to open the windows. The hearing had paused for recess, but the country hadn't. While the committee chamber fell into a brief and uneasy stillness, the rest of America was already reacting. Not waiting, not debating, reacting, and not just in Washington. In a barbershop in Shreveport, Louisiana, the midday news played on a mounted TV, grainy but clear. The owner, Curtis, mid-50s, faded Eagles cap, clippers still humming in one hand, froze mid-trim when the footage aired. It wasn't the shouting that stopped him. It was the moment AOC slid the Ridge Hill Agreement across the table, paired it with the signature analysis and said, "I'm not burning the house down, just letting in the light." Curtis stared for a second, then shook his head slowly. She didn't scream. She proved. The young man in the chair, half-faded cut on pause, nodded. That ain't politics. That's receipts. 4 states west, in a coffee shop on the outskirts of Sacramento, 2 retired teachers sat by the window with lukewarm lattes and a tablet balanced between them. They had followed politics for years, wary, skeptical, used to disappointment, but this felt different. She sat there with folders, not fury, one said, her voice low but firm. I've never seen someone gut a story with nothing but evidence. Her friend leaned in. I kept waiting for her to overplay it. She never did. A few tables over, a barista paused refilling the sugar jar to glance at the same clip playing on her phone. AOC's voice calm, Greene red-faced and frozen. It wasn't just viral, it was cutting through. At a small church gathering in Macon, Georgia, the pastor's wife whispered during a break in Bible study, "Did you see what that congresswoman from New York did today?" Her neighbor nodded, folding her hands in her lap. She didn't yell once. She just walked in with a binder and let the truth talk. Across time zones, the story was already leaving screens and entering real conversations. In diners, living rooms, group chats, and lunch tables, The topic was less about politics and more about posture. Not what party you supported, but how someone like AOC had walked into a hostile room and held it still. Not with volume, but with evidence. By mid-afternoon, phones at Representative Greene's district office in Georgia were ringing nonstop. Staffers scrambled to log calls, but they couldn't keep up. The messages blurred together, voicemails stacked up, emails doubled by the hour. Is any of it true? We want a statement. Why aren't you denying it directly? Is there really a beach house? You said you never met him. There's a photo. Her comms team tried to push back with a brief release, something vague about political persecution, deep state tactics, and digital manipulation. But it didn't land. Not this time. Not when people had seen it, heard it, and felt it. In a newsroom in Detroit, an anchor read from the prompter as the clip played behind her. The phrase, "not a witch hunt, it's a mirror," has been shared over 12 million times since yesterday's hearing, sparking national conversation about transparency, ethics, and the power of primary evidence. And through it all, one truth pulsed just beneath the surface of every reaction. This wasn't about whether people liked AOC, it was about whether they believed her. And right now, coast to coast, they did. By the time Capitol Hill reopened for the afternoon session, the landscape had shifted. Not dramatically, not with explosions or resignations, but with a quieter, more telling movement. Silence from those who once stood loudest behind Marjorie Taylor Greene. It began as a whisper in staff hallways, then as a ripple through closed-door meetings, and by mid-afternoon, it became official. 3 Republican members, 2 from swing districts, 1 from a deep red state, quietly submitted a written request to the House Ethics Committee. The language was cautious but unmistakable. Given the seriousness of the documentation presented, we believe an internal review is necessary to preserve public trust. No press conference, no podiums, just a scanned PDF sent through encrypted channels. But on the Hill, it may as well have been a siren. By early evening, Politico leaked the memo. Headlines followed minutes later. Breaking: Republican lawmakers call for ethics review into Greene PAC discrepancies. Inside Greene's office, the mood darkened. One aide sat motionless at her desk, phone buzzing every 20 seconds. Another tried in vain to craft a new talking point. But Greene wasn't listening. She was writing. Late that night, she posted a long message across her official channels, a fiery, combative response wrapped in familiar rhetoric. The headline was big and bold. "I'm being silenced by the deep state." She blamed the Biden administration. She blamed the media. She hinted that AOC was part of a larger conspiracy. She referenced dark money elites and fabricated evidence. She even named the Republican members who had requested the inquiry, calling them cowards who folded under fake pressure. But this time, the reaction was different. The usual firestorm of support didn't ignite. The retweets came slower. The likes stalled. Her most vocal allies, representatives who once flooded the airwaves to defend her, remained silent. One issued a vague statement about letting the facts speak. Another declined comment altogether. A third flatly told reporters, "We're focused on delivering results for our districts." Even Fox News didn't jump to her defense. A scheduled segment promoting her response was quietly replaced with a panel about border policy. When a host did mention the Post, he quickly pivoted to, "Both sides have issues with transparency," then moved on. Inside Greene's own staff, cracks deepened. A senior advisor recommended that she not post at all. He was overruled. Hours later, he cleared out his desk. Meanwhile, AOC said nothing. She gave no interviews, issued no victory tweets. Her press office posted a one-sentence statement. "We remain committed to transparency and will continue cooperating with any official inquiry." That was it. No heat, no spin, just distance. And that distance made Greene look even more alone. She tried again the next morning, this time with a video from her backyard flanked by 2 American flags, reciting the same language about being targeted by enemies of freedom. But the views were modest, the comments were mixed, and the fire she was used to commanding had, for the first time, flickered against her. Because when your own side starts stepping back, it's not about loyalty anymore. It's about liability. And in the wake of what the public had seen, what her colleagues had read, and what her silence had failed to explain, The cost of standing with her was finally outweighing the benefit. As headlines surged and cable networks scrambled for panelists, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez remained still. Not absent, not avoiding, but deliberately quiet. While political commentators speculated, and hashtags like hashtag mirror, not witch hunt, and hashtag passgate climbed the charts, she turned down every interview request that flooded her office in the hours after the hearing. No CNN sit-down, no MSNBC primetime hit, no viral Instagram live. Instead, she posted just one thing. It appeared mid-morning the day after the clip reached 10 million views. A simple white background statement card on her official congressional feed. No filters, no hashtags, no flame emojis. Just a 7-word caption in black serif font. Thank you. This was about the truth. It had no video attached, no links, no fundraising ask. But within 20 minutes, it had over 500,000 likes and more than 100,000 reposts. Because while the country was still trying to process what they'd seen, Greene's denials, the signatures, the silent committee members, the line that had turned into a movement, AOC didn't chase the reaction. She let it settle. She let the footage speak louder than any post ever could. Back in New York, reporters camped outside her district office. They were met with polite, consistent replies from staff. The Congresswoman has no further comment at this time. On the Hill, her schedule remained unchanged. She attended a housing subcommittee meeting as planned. She sat in on a local transit policy session. When asked by colleagues whether she would be holding a press conference, she shook her head lightly and simply said, "There's work to do." Her restraint became the story. Politico ran the headline, "AOC says nothing, and it says everything." A columnist at The Atlantic wrote, "In an age where politicians sprint toward the camera, she stepped back from it. In doing so, she let the evidence breathe and the silence roar." Even those who had once dismissed her as performative were forced to acknowledge the shift. One senior Republican strategist admitted off-record to a reporter, if she wanted to take a victory lap, she could have owned the cycle for a week, but she didn't. That scares us more. Meanwhile, in Greene's world, the opposite occurred. Her posts got louder, her headlines more defensive, and the gap between the two women, one shouting, one silent, only widened in the public's perception. And still, AOC said nothing. No live tweets during evening panels. No follow-up threads or op-eds. She attended a community meeting in the Bronx that Friday night, unannounced, taking notes in a church basement about rent stabilization and heating outages. One elderly woman recognized her and gently tapped her shoulder. "You really didn't yell," the woman whispered. "That's how I knew you meant it." AOC smiled but said nothing, because by then it was already understood. This wasn't about crushing a rival or scoring a headline. It wasn't about building a brand or burning one down. It was about letting the truth stand on its own and trusting that if it was real enough, it didn't need to shout to be heard. It just needed to be shown. Once, and then left alone. The community hall was packed wall to wall. Folding chairs creaked beneath neighbors, teachers, veterans, and young parents holding restless toddlers on their laps. No media cameras, no podiums dressed in logos, just a hand-painted sign that read, "Bronx Town Forum, Truth Matters." Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez stepped onto the low stage without fanfare. She wore no blazer, no lapel mic, just a simple navy sweater and a yellow notebook in her hand, corners slightly bent. She looked out over the room and took a moment before speaking. Not for effect, but for grounding. "When I walked into that hearing room," she began, "I didn't carry a sword. I carried a folder. I didn't come for drama. I came with documents." A few people nodded. A teacher near the back murmured, "That's right." AOC continued, voice calm but firm. "This past week has stirred up a lot. Anger, celebration, skepticism, hope. I've heard it all. But I want to be clear. This was never about one person, not me, not her." She didn't have to say Marjorie's name. The room already understood. This, she lifted the yellow notebook slightly, was about something much bigger. It was about reminding this country that power without truth is just noise, and we've had enough noise. There was a quiet ripple of agreement across the room. Someone whispered, "Amen." Too many people in Washington think that if they yell loud enough, the facts won't matter. That if they distract long enough, the consequences won't catch up. But truth is patient. It doesn't shout. It shows up, on paper, in records, in names we were told to forget. And when it does, it doesn't care if it's inconvenient. A young man raised his hand. "But do you think anything will actually change?" AOC paused, then answered without sugarcoating. "Some things will, some won't. But here's what I know. When truth is spoken clearly, it echoes. And echoes don't die. They move. From hearing rooms to barber shops, from classrooms to dinner tables. Change begins not just with laws, but with what we accept as normal. And last week, that was a step in saying, this is not normal and it's not okay. An older woman in the front stood up, not to ask a question, but to say something. I watched the whole thing, twice. Not because I like politics, I actually don't, but because for the first time in a long time, it felt like someone remembered we were watching. The room clapped, not loud, but long. AOC smiled, then closed her notebook. "And that," she said gently, "is why I stayed silent afterward. Not every truth needs an encore. Some just need a moment to land." She stepped down from the stage with no music, no security escort, just a crowd parting and a few people reaching out, not for autographs, but simply to touch her arm, to say thank you. Outside the hall, the wind had picked up, but it wasn't harsh, just enough to carry a few words a little further. And tonight, those words were these: "We've had enough noise. It's time we start listening again." It began with a short memo posted to the official House website. No fanfare, no press conference. The House Committee on Ethics will open a formal investigation into allegations regarding the misuse of political action committee funds and potential financial conflicts of interest. Just one paragraph. But in Washington, that paragraph hit like a thunderclap. By noon, it was headline news. By evening, it was a wildfire. Cable panels dissected every frame of the hearing. Analysts paused the video like a courtroom drama, rewinding AOC's calm delivery, zooming in on Marjorie Taylor Greene's clenched jaw, frame by frame. But the story didn't stay confined to Capitol Hill. At Howard University, a political science professor opened class not with a textbook, but with a paused live stream screenshot. He asked, "What does accountability look like when the camera's on? And what should it look like when it's off?" At Stanford, students debated campaign finance ethics, not from theory, but from transcripts. A podcast titled Democracy, Undone released a surprise episode, The Folder That Spoke Louder Than the Floor. It reached 1 million downloads in less than 48 hours. In it, a host remarked, "This wasn't a scandal that exploded. It was one that unfolded, line by line, footnote by footnote, like a thread you didn't know was unraveling your sweater until it was too late." In local coffee shops, people weren't arguing left versus right. They were asking, if this is what was caught, what's been missed? For Marjorie Taylor Greene, the tone around her changed. Not loud, not public, but different. Invitations to friendly interviews were quietly retracted. Donors paused wire transfers. 3 GOP staffers confirmed to the press, off the record, that their bosses were reassessing proximity. And the ethics committee? They weren't just reviewing the folder. They were subpoenaing PAC filings, digital call logs, travel reimbursements, going deeper than C-SPAN's reach. Meanwhile, AOC remained silent. No victory lap, no viral clip reposts, only a quiet shift in the wind. The kind of shift that told Washington this wasn't performative politics. This was procedural reckoning. And that difference, subtle as it seemed, was seismic. By week's end, an op-ed ran in The Atlantic titled, "When the Truth Doesn't Yell, It Wins." And in a civics class in Des Moines, a 7th grader raised his hand and asked, "Is this what real leadership looks like?" His teacher didn't answer immediately, because sometimes history doesn't need a reply. It just needs to be witnessed. The light in the room was soft, golden, the kind of light that didn't demand attention, but gave permission to pause. Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez sat on the corner of her couch, a knit throw pulled over one leg, glasses perched low on her nose. In her hands, the now famous folder. Its edges were slightly frayed. The tab that once screamed Disclosure Index 422 was bent. Its ink faded just enough to suggest it had been opened and reopened and opened again. She turned a few pages. The spreadsheet with highlighted transactions, the Google Street View printout, the audio transcript of a muffled voice saying, "Reroute to a secure account." She didn't linger on them, just glanced as if confirming something already deeply understood. A beat passed, then she closed the folder slowly, deliberately. The soft thud of meeting paper echoed faintly in the room, a gentle punctuation to a storm that had started with whispers and ended in silence. Her eyes didn't move to the TV, which was off, or to her phone, which buzzed occasionally from across the room. She looked straight ahead as if seeing not a screen, but a principle. Not applause, but the aftermath. From somewhere, a voice, her own, began to narrate. When you fight with facts, you don't need to shout. You don't need to shame. You just need to show up prepared. Cut to black. Then in white lettering, slow and steady. The mic was never off. No music, no montage. Just the lingering hum of a quiet room where something important had already been said. And for once, in this age of viral rage, of headlines that scream and scrolls that never stop, silence wasn't an absence. It was the final word. This story reminds us that strength in politics doesn't always roar. It can arrive quietly, armed with evidence, clarity, and resolve. AOC's calm dismantling of deception isn't just a win for one side, it's a win for accountability. In an age of spectacle, she chose substance. Her silence wasn't retreat, it was restraint. And her power came not from performance, but preparation. Truth doesn't need a spotlight. It just needs to be told. What do you believe matters more today? Loud voices or clear facts? Let us know how you define courage in moments that test integrity. If this story touched you, don't let it stop here. Like, share, and subscribe to Alexandria Rising Stories, where every voice matters and every story echoes far beyond the screen. This story is a fictionalized and dramatized narrative created for educational, inspirational, and storytelling purposes. While it may be inspired by real public events, people, or societal issues, it includes imagined dialogue, reconstructed scenes, and character interpretations meant to highlight broader themes of justice, dignity, and resilience. Any resemblance to actual events or individuals beyond public knowledge is purely coincidental. We do not intend to defame, mislead, or harm, but to invite reflection and meaningful conversation. Thank you for watching Alexandria Rising Stories.